Hey internet friends, for years we've examined the daily activities of swamp creatures. We've covered the hierarchy of the criminal elite. We've debated over the origins of the global establishment. But it's time we discuss how exactly we can go about dismantling the deep state. I propose we take a little inspiration from Sun Tzu and forget strength against strength, but rather strike where the enemy is weak. That's why we're going to dive right into the sordid network of the criminal cartel and their connections, bridging their shadowy past to the ever-evolving present. By chopping away at the roots of the poison tree, focusing on one unsuspecting individual who spent decades constructing his squeaky clean persona. Today, we're aiming straight for the Achilles heel of the deep state, Mitt Romney. No, you haven't been teleported back to the 2012 election. I'm seriously dragging Mitt Romney back from whatever pit he's been festering in ever since his loss. And trust me, it won't take long to see why. Mitt Romney was born into one of the most distinguished Mormon families, a family who was intertwined with politics long before Romney ever made his presidential bid. His father served as the governor of Michigan and was in President Nixon's cabinet. Needless to say, his family was on top. As a freshman at Stanford University, Romney's classmates reported witnessing him dressing up as a police officer on more than one occasion. And Romney bragged about putting a red flashing light and siren on top of his car to pull over unsuspecting drivers. In the middle of his college studies, Romney traveled to France as a Mormon missionary, which afforded him the opportunity to totally dodge the draft for the Vietnam War. Eventually, he left Harvard Business School in the 1970s to join the Boston Consulting Group, where he worked alongside Benjamin Netanyahu, whom you might know as the Prime Minister of Israel. One of Boston Consulting Group's big clients was Monsanto, an agrochemical and agricultural biotechnology corporation that was started in 1908 by a pharmaceutical company agent who sought to produce saccharin, an artificial sweetener that was only manufactured in Germany at the time. Meanwhile, back in the US in the late 1920s, Monsanto began producing PCBs for an estimated 40 years, knowingly discharging toxic waste into a West Anniston, Alabama creek, and dumping millions of pounds of PCBs into open-pit landfills, the result of which was an Anniston community rife with cancer. Monsanto's chemicals were saturated in the dirt, air, food supply, and even the blood of the residents. Monsanto knew what they did, the people of Anniston knew what they did, and certainly the government was well aware too. Everybody knew these chemicals they were synthesizing would destroy God's creation, and God's creation would be replaced with Monsanto's own creation. Regardless, Monsanto was contracted by the government to produce toxic chemicals like DDT and dioxins like Agent Orange in the coming decades. Agent Orange was the most commonly used herbicidal poison that was sprayed over rural Vietnam during the Vietnam War. And since the Vietnam War, there's been an epidemic of birth defects, chronic illnesses, and fetal anomalies. Not to mention, Agent Orange was also used heavily over the perimeters of many US military bases, which resulted in Agent Orange being splashed directly upon American soldiers. And post-war class action lawsuits followed, in which Monsanto routinely denied that there was a link between their poisons and the veterans' health problems. Eventually, it was decided that a Vietnam veteran would receive a maximum of $12,000 as a settlement to spread out over the course of 10 years. And by accepting this settlement, a disabled veteran would become ineligible for many state benefits such as food stamps, public assistance, and government pensions. So much for respecting and caring for our veterans, right? These days, you know Monsanto for their lawsuits regarding the deadly effects of Roundup exposure, the monopolization and genetic modification of the world's food supply, and Bill Gates' intense financial interest in the company. In the last few years, Monsanto was acquired by Bayer, who was once a part of a giant chemical cartel known as IG Farben, the second largest stockholder of Rockefeller's Standard Oil, and the single largest donor to the campaign of Adolf Hitler, despite many of the prominent scientists and figureheads of IG Farben being Jewish. Bayer used Auschwitz as a testing grounds for genetic modification, chemical experiments, pharmaceuticals, and vaccine trials on prisoners, with its most notorious practice of using Zyklon B within the camps. And after Bayer conducted these experiments, like testing out vaccines, they later collected the bodies for autopsy. Eventually, some of the IG Farben scientists were tried for their war crimes at the Nuremberg trials. After sentencing prominent scientists to incredibly short imprisonments, a good number of these German scientists were relocated from Germany to the United States in Operation Paperclip, given new identities and installed in positions of power within the United States government, heading NASA, the CIA, and biological warfare programs. On a related note, Standard Oil was convicted of war crimes when it was discovered that the Standard Oil president was giving free oil to Hitler. But while he was convicted, nothing really happened, and Standard Oil became bigger than ever, with Rockefeller medicine and vaccines dominating the for-profit medical playground in the United States. So we can trace Monsanto and Bayer back to World War II Germany. And it's been said that Monsanto and Bayer were always one company from the very beginning. But the $66 billion Bayer-Monsanto merger in 2018 just made it official and public for the masses. And with this connection, we can link Mitt Romney's first major client straight to Nazi Germany, and Mitt Romney himself to Operation Paperclip. So let's pause to consider this for a moment. Mitt Romney had family money. He was a good-looking guy. He could have done anything. He could have had any job he wanted. But what did he end up doing? He took over Monsanto at the height of Agent Orange, meaning that Mitt Romney himself was a defense contractor supplying a product he knew to be toxic. And he and his client have lied about it ever since. At its peak production of Agent Orange for the United States government in the 1970s, Monsanto was such an attractive client, Romney and his colleagues from Boston Consulting took the Monsanto account and began their own consulting firm, now known as Bain & Company, one of the big three elite management consulting firms who has been notoriously secretive about itself and its work for its clients, earning Bain & Company the title of the KGB of consulting over the years. From the very beginning, Monsanto, a company who has historically and exclusively dealt in toxic products, made Bain & Company a ton of money. Monsanto, who produced deadly chemicals that they knowingly sprayed over a bunch of people, made Mitt Romney a ton of money. In 2001, Monsanto and DuPont bought a biotech company that had created a gene that made the male sperm sterile, and the crop was called contraceptive corn, saying that fields of maize may one day save the world from overpopulation. So let me just ask, if the genocidal maniacs at Monsanto weren't going to tell you that the chemicals they were spraying on you would cause an array of cancers and birth defects, what are the chances they would tell you if something you're eating would make you sterile? Romney quickly rose up the ranks at Bain, becoming one of the company's vice presidents by the late 1970s, and eventually heading Bain's venture capital arm called Bain Capital in 1984. Though not the first of Romney's outside investors, British publisher Robert Maxwell was among one of the early investors in Romney's Bain Capital. You might have heard me talk about Robert Maxwell before, since he's the father of Ghislaine Maxwell, who's been accused of running a sex trafficking blackmail operation alongside Jeffrey Epstein, a blackmail ring that is allegedly tied to Mossad. Robert Maxwell himself also has ties to Mossad, and at the time of his death was accused of being a double or even triple agent for Britain, Israel, and Russia. It's unlikely that Ghislaine knew Epstein at the time of her father's investment to Romney's project, but I'm illustrating the point that these dark connections run deep, and we can trace them across decades. Our deep state is one tiny little group. Speaking of Epstein and blackmail operations with minors, Epstein's buddy, Bill Gates, co-founder of Microsoft and one of the publicly richest people in the world, is looped into this sordid web of connections with Mitt Romney. While Bain functions as a private equity firm, I think we can quite confidently say that Bain Company is a U.S. intelligence front and military-industrial company, since some of the most famous people out of Bain are high-level government officials. One of them being former Vice President Dick Cheney, who was in the White House during Vietnam, serving under Presidents Nixon and Ford, earning the position of the Secretary of Defense under the George H.W. Bush administration, only to leave the White House to become one of Bain's most lucrative accounts as the CEO of Halliburton, a government contractor. So not only did Mitt Romney and Dick Cheney both spray Agent Orange, which the government and Monsanto both knew to be toxic from the get-go, but they were also Iraq war profiteers to the tune of $40 billion. Bain's most famous clients were and are Dick Cheney's Halliburton, Raytheon, Monsanto, Microsoft, Starbucks, and even the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Bain manages a great portion of the Fortune 500 companies. That's why their stocks do so well. And while Bain says they're a consulting firm, their pattern is more of a buyout firm that comes in, takes over, and quietly leaves the shell intact while they place their own people in positions of power within a company. So when you walk into any government building or school and witness people working on computers with Microsoft installed on them, that's Bain & Company. When you see Bill Gates interviewed on the 6 o'clock news labeled as a pandemic expert or talking about mandatory vaccinations and grinning with glee, that's Bain & Company. When you see Mitt Romney, a man who was supposed to be president and is now a sitting senator, marching with people who have expressly stated their desire to burn down our cities, that's Bain & Company. Mitt Romney attended law school so he could enter politics. And while it's highly debated when Romney officially left Bain & Company to make the short leap from business to politics, Romney followed in his father's footsteps, becoming the governor of Massachusetts in the early 2000s. In 2012, he decided to run against Barack Obama for the president of the United States. And quite frankly, Romney should have been a shoo-in. After all, he was groomed for this role. But the fact was, he lost. And so he continued his political career as a senator, a position he holds to this day. His squeaky clean, wholesome Mormon reputation was one of the qualities that made him attractive to so many conservative voters. But does this reputation hold true when Romney was one of the original members of Bain & Company? The only guy who founded Bain Capital, and Bain Capital is the only company that manages Ryan Seacrest. And Ryan Seacrest is the manager of the Kardashians, the pop culture powerhouse of a family and TV show that spanned 18 seasons, introducing new societal norms and debates into the American conversation, particularly through Caitlyn Jenner, born Bruce Jenner, Olympic gold medalist, father to 6 children, and star of Keeping Up with the Kardashians, making Caitlyn Jenner the most famous transgender woman in the whole world. Not only is Mitt Romney responsible for the rise of the Kardashians, but he's responsible for the rise of companies who manufacture the hormones, chemicals, and pills to make little boys transition to little girls and little girls transition to little boys before they ever hit puberty. If Mitt Romney was openly running as the Mystery Babylon pagan Republican candidate, then okay, we've got something going here, seems on par with the religious ideology. And the discussion really ends there, but no, he continues to parade around as a conservative Mormon, which is a smidge misleading to say the least. My point is, Mitt Romney is totally inseparable from his past, as he's given rise to some of the most powerful corporations that have forever changed the cultural and political landscape of not just the United States, but the world. Isn't that crazy to say out loud, that corporations have forever changed the cultural and political landscape of the world, and a corporation serves the purpose of putting a degree of separation between the company's actions and the individuals calling the shots? So what I'm really saying here is that the 1%, the deep state, the owners, the human farmers, whatever you want to call them, are using corporations and even philanthropic organizations to disguise their agenda and avoid personal liability. And as we've demonstrated with Bain & Company, the government has been on board and aided in this endeavor. So much for free market capitalism, right? It gets a little darker when we ask, what do these companies that Mitt Romney boosted, what do they actually do? These private companies that are part of the government, just like Mitt Romney was a private businessman but was somehow directly related to every single defense company in America. It makes you wonder, does it really matter who we elect into power if corporations are controlling our country? Despite the Monsanto-Bayer merger, Monsanto has not been able to escape the consequences of its crimes against humanity. So many individuals have gotten cancer as a result of being exposed to Monsanto Roundup, which is basically just Agent Orange repackaged, as Roundup is just another Monsanto herbicide that's killing people. The class action lawsuits are stacking up alongside the bodies. Wouldn't it be amazing to see those responsible for so much death get hauled away by police to a swift trial and an even swifter display of public justice? While you can call me a bootlicker all you want, I understand the justice system is far from perfect. But it's even more flawed and ineffective when those who commit crimes against humanity use a corporate front to donate to organizations that explicitly state their goal of defunding the police, rendering the power of arrest null and void. All you gotta do is follow the money, and Mitt Romney's Bain companies that became huge corporations are the ones that now donate to BLM. And where exactly does that money go? Does it go to enriching the lives of African American families? Of course not. it goes to a specific political party. And Mitt Romney endorsed it. He marched for it under the guise of social justice. But if he really cared about Black lives, why did he give rise to companies that poison the groundwater, air, and blood of Black cities? Why did he give rise to an organization that specifically carries out vaccine trials in Black countries? I'll tell you why. Chaos is the secret weapon the deep state believes will save them. This is the gameplay of the Rockefeller-Rothschild system from 100 years ago. To destabilize a nation, to divide and conquer the people as a means of distraction, to release dangerous convicts while imprisoning people who don't adhere to the new normal, to push society into total collapse so the 1% can assume control for the foreseeable future, all the while providing citizens with pills to subdue them into complacency. There's this palpable feeling that hell is about to break loose. All I'm proposing is that we attack the heart of the system, and while the system isn't limited to the companies and individuals I've spoken about in this video, I've exposed the weakest link. Bane is the elephant in the room, and the frontman, Mitt Romney, is their Achilles heel. What do you think, internet friends? You know I always look forward to reading your comments. Thank you so much for watching, subscribing, and supporting my channel on Patreon.